In today's video, we'll be taking a deep dive into the life of the biggest white-collar criminal that the world has ever seen. Jho Low is the man who orchestrated the largest financial scandal in all of history. He managed to get away with stealing $4.4 billion at the height of his courageous career, becoming an international fugitive in the process. His job was simple: use the connections that he had made to make money and portray a glamorous social life while leaving morality to the side. Jho was born to a wealthy Chinese family in Georgetown, Malaysia. At a young age, Jho Low would quickly realize the different levels of wealth. His family had millions thanks to his father, Hock Peng Lau, founder of the investment holding company MWE Holdings. While attending Harrow School, a prestigious boarding school in the UK, he saw that his classmates were sons of oil tycoons and oligarchs who had billions to their name, making him feel left out and poor.
You're broke!
Eventually, he would begin to create a facade that would be integral to his career. He began researching cool hairstyles and songs to gain social recognition. Jho Low even went as far as to borrow his father's friends' houses and luxury yachts when his classmates visited on vacation. Gradually, Jho Low found himself befriending the likes of Saudi princes and, most importantly, Riza Aziz, stepson of the soon-to-be Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak. By the time Jho Low graduated Harrow High School, he was a step closer to his true desires of wealth and influence. As Jho Low kept climbing the social ladder, he attended Wharton Business School in Pennsylvania, a prestigious university that costs a whopping $47,000 per semester. It was here where Jho Low really solidified his persona of an extremely wealthy, intelligent man who thrived off building connections and making others feel important. Wharton School became his playground, not for academic excellence, but for the cultivation of relationships that would become instrumental in his future endeavors. Once Jho Low turned 21, he threw an extravagant birthday party, making sure his newfound friends felt important by giving them the VIP experience. He would also write for his school journal, plagiarizing the Wall Street Journal's articles and financial advice, which would go unnoticed, gaining him praise for his financial genius. At this point, Jho Low's mind was made up. He saw the corrupt world of international finance as his one-way ticket to extreme wealth, and he was willing to take any possible shortcut. Jho Low was not merely a student, he was a player in the intricate game of wealth, getting ready to make his first move. Once Jho Low graduated, he returned to Malaysia with his newfound connections and knowledge. Jho began orchestrating his inevitable rise to riches, founding his first company, the Winton Group. Jho Low would joke with his friends, saying he planned on winning tons of money, hence the name. Thanks to his friend Kadim Al-Qusaybi, a prominent Emirati businessman, Jho Low was able to meet with Yusuf Al-Otaiba and Khaldoon Al-Mubarak, the two men who overlooked Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund. A sovereign wealth fund can be looked at like a private government-owned savings account. These accounts are often misused by corrupt governments for their personal gain instead of benefiting the nation, making them the perfect fit for Jho Low's plan. Jho Low being able to meet with the heads of Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth fund was a massive jumpstart to his career, since they are one of the largest sovereign wealth funds with upwards of $700 billion as of today. When Jho initially met with the titans in Abu Dhabi, he realized that the two men who ran the firm were only in their late 20s, leading him to wonder what was stopping him from doing the same thing in Malaysia. Jho Low knew exactly where to begin. His best friend Riza Aziz's stepfather, Najib Razak, was currently the Deputy Prime Minister of Malaysia, one step away from the top of government, giving him unimaginable leverage in the country. Jho was looking to get into Najib's good graces, and as luck would have it, Malaysia's current sovereign wealth fund, Khazanah Nasional, was looking for investors to support a construction project. Now that he was connected with his wealthy Middle Eastern friends, Jho would approach Najib Razak with an opportunity that he couldn't refuse. You see, Jho knew that no matter how connected you are, you must approach business with value. And at the end of any good negotiation, both parties should leave feeling like they have won. So Jho Joe would tell Najib that he could put together a deal for Khazanah to secure funds for this project via his Arab friends, promising to give Najib all the credit for securing the deal. Najib would quickly pounce on this opportunity, as he would do anything for the spot at the top of the Malaysian government. Although it seems like Jho Low didn't gain anything out of this transaction, he would now have the second highest ranking official in Malaysia at his side if everything came to fruition. Fortunately for Joe, he played the perfect middleman, and when the deal went through, the real opportunities would arrive. Najib was now known as the man who made deals happen, skyrocketing his popularity amongst the Malaysian people, which would quickly lead to his election as the Prime Minister of Malaysia in 2009. Joe had proven himself beyond useful to Najib, and it was time for him to reap the benefits of his labor and cash in. At this point, Jho Low was already one of the most influential men in the world, and he wasted no time trading that influence for cash. Once Najib was sworn in, Joe would immediately approach him with the idea of creating a new sovereign wealth fund, one that would operate like a private investment firm just like the ones in the Middle East. Najib was pleased with the idea of Joe brokering another successful deal on his behalf, so he had complete belief in him and his abilities. This was music to Jho Low's ears. Once Najib agreed, they founded the One Malaysia Development Berhad, or the 1MDB Fund, with Najib as the fund's chairman and Joe as the unofficial advisor to 1MDB. The new fund had the goal of investing in green energy and tourism jobs for Malaysia. Joe's ability to make it this far alone is just a testament to his philosophy of not focusing on hard work, but focusing on acquiring a strong network. With the Prime Minister now in the palm of his hands, Joe would close their first deal just 2 months after opening the firm. Joe had persuaded Najib that he had the perfect investment in Middle Eastern oil, so he would connect Najib with a so-called Saudi prince who would recommend that Najib invest in Petro Saudi, an international private oil exploration and production company headquartered in Saudi Arabia. With the deal swiftly signed, Najib agreed to invest $1 billion from the Malaysian government into Petro Saudi. But there was one corrupt caveat. Najib would personally benefit monetarily from this deal, allowing him to use the proceedings for anything he pleased, such as his political campaigns. But Najib wasn't the only one who profited from this deal. Although he was only an unofficial advisor at 1MDB, Jho Low essentially assumed the role of head honcho for this exchange, and he would only invest a measly $300 million with Petro Saudi, transferring a staggering $700 million to his shell company, Goodstar Limited, a shell company that was based in Seychelles with offshore accounts in Switzerland. Since this was a bearer share company, this meant whoever had the stock certificate, which was a physical piece of paper, owned the company, making it hard to connect to him. Jho Low had just pulled off the scheme of a lifetime without a single suspicion, because he made sure that 1MDB was full of people who he could fully trust. To evade any suspicion from the Malaysian public, Jho Low would propagate that the reason only $300 million was sent was due to Malaysia having an outstanding debt that they had to pay off. He also claimed that Goodstar Limited was a Saudi-owned firm and had no connection to him whatsoever. After all was said and done, Joe would go on to pay his Middle Eastern friends their $100 million cut. Jho Low was now one step closer to his dream of unmatched wealth, with $600 million in his bank account. Even with such a simple strategy, Jho Low managed to pull off the money magic trick of the century. But he didn't stop there. He had only gotten more ambitious with the inspiration to do something bigger and better. Joe had his eyes set on one of the world's top players in investment banking, Goldman Sachs. Coincidentally, Jho Low's brother, Sen Low, worked at Goldman Sachs, allowing him to gain access to his next golden ticket, Tim Lesner, the head of Goldman Sachs Asia division. Joe would take a page out of his own playbook by giving Tim Lesner a VIP experience. When they met, Joe would fly him out to Abu Dhabi, getting him in meetings with some of the richest sheikhs in the world. A pattern began to emerge where Joe would focus on befriending an extremely powerful person, offering them favors that they couldn't refuse, and in exchange, Joe would get what he wanted later down the line. His brief interactions with Tim Lesner would lead to Goldman Sachs working directly with 1MDB, Goldman Sachs would go on to generate $3.5 billion in bond sales for 1MDB by promising customers that the bonds would skyrocket after 1MDB executed their plan of buying coal power plants that they would package into their company portfolio with the goal of going public on the Malaysian Stock Exchange. Jho hoped this money would cover the debt incurred from his initial scandal, but the one problem was that 1MDB had no credit, making bond sales technically impossible at first. This is where Tim Lesner stepped into the circle of corruption with Jho and began to bribe the right people to get the company listed. This would lead to Goldman Sachs giving 1MDB over $5 billion in bond sales over time. Goldman Sachs wasn't necessarily known for their morality in the finance sector, so whenever they transferred funds to 1MDB, a significant portion would be siphoned out to offshore accounts owned by Jho Low, who would then pay off Najib and Tim Lesner for their cooperation in his scheme. Once Jho Low had managed to turn fantasy into reality, he now had $4.4 billion cash, possibly making him the richest man in the world while still being in his 20s. Having achieved his seemingly insane financial goals, Jho was no longer the little kid who felt like his riches were nothing in comparison to the real wealth that surrounded him. He was now a top shot wherever he went, and he began to seek social currency instead. Jho began this journey of his life by boasting his money wherever he went, purchasing a private jet, luxury yachts, and mansions all over the USA, which was his primary residence at the time. He would frequently buy out clubs, throwing secret parties with red carpet royalty such as Leonardo Dicaprio, Paris Hilton, Ludacris, and Kim Kardashian, to name a few. He became somewhat of a celebrity amongst celebrities, known for his extravagant events and glorious gifts. One time he gifted Kim Kardashian a white Ferrari for her wedding.
How sweet!
And Leonardo DiCaprio was the recipient of 2 rare paintings totaling $12 million. At this point, Jho Low had it all. He began to gain a reputation for everything he dreamed of becoming, even dating famous supermodels and singers along the way. Low, loving every second of the limelight, began to further connect himself to Hollywood the only way he knew how, by making more investments. Since his money-making days were over and Jho didn't have to work for the rest of his life, he would embark in passion projects. One of his investments being a $100 million chunk of equity in EMI Publishing, one of the top publishers in the music world. Along with this purchase, Jho Low would notably go on to establish the Red Granite Pictures Company with his friend Riza Aziz. Funnily enough, with the stolen money Jho Low had procured in his con-filled career, he would fund the production of the cult classic Wolf of Wall Street, a movie about financial fraud. This move by Jho Low was outright egotistical, and soon the people of Malaysia would begin to question his entire operation, even with the Malaysian public's growing suspicion of the 1MDB fund. Jho Low felt as if he was secure, since Najib was still in office and he was still supplying him with political campaigning funds. It was later revealed that he even gifted Najib's wife millions in jewelry, likely to calm down any nerves from Najib and his wife as their popularity began to decline. In 2015, Xavier Justo, a Swiss banker who was connected to 1MDB, would leak 230,000 confidential documents to the press, exposing Jho and Najib for their fraudulent ways along with anyone who had associated with them. This unprecedented leak would cause thousands of Malaysians to protest against Najib. To make things worse, Najib would go on to lose his upcoming election in 2018, spelling out the end of his political career and the start of all his problems. Najib would immediately attempt to flee the country, but he unluckily would be arrested for his involvement in the fraud before he could do so. When questioned, Najib would make the silly claim that he just wanted to go on a golf trip and that he had no intention of abandoning Malaysia. As the international investigation into 1MDB progressed, Jho Low, the Malaysian money man at the center of it all, was nowhere to be found. Although authorities had already began seizing his assets, reclaiming around $1 billion from him, he still remained untouched by the hands of authorities around the world looking to arrest him. In 2020, trial proceedings began to ramp up, with Najib and Goldman Sachs facing all of the heat. Najib was facing multiple counts of financial fraud, and Goldman Sachs Sachs was able to reach a settlement with Malaysia for $3.9 billion. Fortunately for Najib's stepson, Riza Aziz, he was able to reach a settlement of $107 million for Malaysia to drop his money laundering charges. Fast forward to 2023, Najib is currently facing a 12-year prison sentence for his crimes, with dozens of other pending charges related to the misappropriation of 1MDB funds. With his scapegoat still facing all of the consequences, Jho Low was last seen still living his best life in Macau, China, where he would occasionally go to nightclubs. His presence in China leads authorities to believe that he is being protected by a wealthy Chinese politician, since China is not cooperating with Malaysia's pleas to extradite him. Surprisingly, Jho Low was recently recorded speaking with a representative of the Malaysian Prime Minister, bargaining for his freedom while completely throwing Najib under the bus.
And so on and so forth, but I'm pragmatic, but I don't want to get involved in basically Najib related items. So they're pretty clear, I think, on that front.
Okay.
I don't think they'll throw him under the bus, but I think they are very concerned it impacts them sort of, from a reputational perspective.
Okay.
Even when faced with warrants for his arrest, an Interpol red notice against him in Singapore and Malaysia, an indictment for alleged money laundering by US authorities, US campaign bribery law violations, and a sentence in absentia for 10 years in jail by Kuwait, Jho Low managed to weasel his way out of it all, still remaining a free and likely extremely wealthy man in China. Jho Low's story is one that is hard to relate to. Given his financially fortunate circumstances, he was still ungrateful for what he had, ruthlessly seeking more. But one thing you can commend him for is his ability to leverage his relationships to create almost unlimited wealth. This story also shines a light on the ever-corrupt world of government finance and the lack of accountability for those who know the right people at the right time. No matter the country, there will always be individuals who work their way to the top only to let greed consume them. I mean, you can't really blame them. If you had a money printer at your disposal, you'd probably do the same thing. Thanks for watching today's video. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and stay tuned for more ELTameem.